Welcome back to the Vitals Podcast. I'm your host, Chauncey, back yet again to digest and bring you the latest in medical news today. It is Monday, June 17th, 2024, and I have some alarming news for you today. But before we start, I want to make an announcement. I have a Discord server. The invite link is in the description. The keen ones know it was their last episode. So join the chat with other listeners. Invite your friends and grow the community. As always, don't forget to follow the podcast and share it with your friends to keep everyone you know in the loop. Last week, we talked about another human case being confirmed in Michigan. As of June 6th, there are no updates on human H5N1 cases, but experts think it likely that we will begin to see more human cases of H5N1 in dairy workers in the coming weeks and months. With that being said, the latest mammals to be infected are mice, which brings a very concerning dynamic to this outbreak. Mice are infamously known for spreading disease. The Black Death, for example, was spread by rodents. Essentially, mice can pick up the virus at dairy farms and bring them to residential areas closer to other humans. Dr. Rick Bright, a former head of the U.S. Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, told The Telegraph that mice-transmitted disease, quote, increases the risk of direct exposure and infection, end quote. The mice are suspected to have drunk unpasteurized contaminated milk on dairy farms, as did cats who died from H5N1 in Texas. The concern is that the virus can travel via mice excreta, urine, fecal matter, saliva, to humans who may come in contact with small amounts of excreta without knowing. Worse still, data uploaded by the USDA on June 4th shows that the mice tested positive for H5N1 on May 8th, more than a month ago. WHO and the CDC still consider the public danger as low for the same reasons it always has. Human-to-human transmission is rare. Nonetheless, they still recommend to minimize exposure to infected birds or mammals and minimize contact with contaminated substances like feces or saliva. Dairy farm workers are encouraged to wear PPE when dealing with animals, monitor themselves after exposure, and always follow industry guidelines with contaminated products like milk or beef. The USDA has publicly stated that contaminated beef is never allowed in the food supply, but recommends we cook beef to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, or well done, to kill any pathogens like H5N1 that may be contaminating it. Save for our H5N1 updates, our first story comes from Dr. Cesar de la Fuente and his team of researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, who are battling the growing public health crisis of antibiotic resistance by optimizing AI. Antibiotic resistance is when disease-causing bacteria are less treatable using antibiotics, and it's a huge problem. You've probably heard of one of its products, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA. It's extremely dangerous in hospitals because it is essentially a severe staph infection that does not respond to antibiotics, and MRSA is only one of many antibiotic-resistant strains. Antibiotic resistance is becoming even worse as people continue to misuse and overuse antibiotics, breeding strains of bacteria that are resistant to more and more of our treatments. That means there is an arms race to produce as many antibiotics as possible before an infectious and deadly strain of bacteria evolves to become resistant to our drugs, creating an unstoppable freak of nature that humanity will be helpless against, or, as it's more commonly known, a superbug. Dr. Cesar de la Fuente and his team, however, are honing in on AI to speed up the often years-long process of discovering these antibiotics to only a few hours with thousands of times the results. They use a machine learning system to identify potential molecules with antimicrobial properties. Then they synthesize or create these molecules in a lab to see if they actually kill bacteria, including, according to de la Fuente, quote, some of the most dangerous pathogens in our society. The results they yielded speak for themselves. 79% of the molecules kill at least one microbe, meaning they could serve as potential antibiotics. That could mean more potential antibiotics on the way. The study authors have made this data and code freely available for anyone to access with the goal of, quote, advancing science and benefiting humanity, end quote, according to De La Fuente. And even though there is still a lot of work to do, they hope to move forward with the investigation and clinical trials using the top candidates for antibiotics in the years to come. Our second story comes from researcher Katsu Takahashi and his team at Kyoto University and University of Fukui in Japan, who are bringing to human trials a new tooth regeneration drug. The average human has 32 teeth, but some have one more or one less because of congenital conditions, and this affects around 1% of the population. In general, it's estimated around 5% of Americans are missing teeth, with a much higher incidence among older adults. Takahashi and his team may have come up with an answer. They are so confident, in fact, that after it worked well in ferrets and mice in 2018, the drug is entering human trials, and the team estimates it will be readily available to the public by 2030. The participants for the trial will reportedly be 30 males as young as 30 and as old as 64 who are missing at least one molar. It is reported that the trial will happen at Kyoto University Hospital, taking place from September 2024 to August 2025. In 11 months, they want to move on to children aged 2 to 7. The researchers knew that teeth morphogenesis depended on bone morphogenetic protein signaling, or BMP signaling, which triggers new tooth growth. However, as the name suggests, the BMP signaling was not only present in teeth growth, and affecting it with a drug could have unwanted side effects throughout the body. This is especially bad if they plan to administer an imprecise drug in early life. They instead honed in on a protein called uterine sensitization associated gene-1 protein, or USAG-1 protein, a protein which suppresses tooth growth. The scientists investigated the effects of several monoclonal antibodies for USAG-1. Monoclonal antibodies are commonly used to treat cancers and arthritis and are used in vaccine development. Many affected other systems and caused higher birth mortality rates in mice, but one promising antibody disrupted only the interaction between USAG-1 and BMP. Without USAG-1 suppressing BMP, the mice and ferrets successfully grew one more tooth without any major side effects. Researcher Takahashi says that, quote, the idea of growing new teeth is every dentist's dream, end quote, and he's not wrong. As of now, when an adult loses their tooth, their only options are dental implants or dentures, but these are artificial replacements for missing teeth. This new molecular therapy may add a new tool to the dentist's toolbox, and you may be getting this therapy sooner than you think. As Takahashi puts it, quote, we hope to pave the way for the medicine's clinical use, end quote. Now it's time for the vitals, where I go in depth on what you need to know about topics of your choice. If you'd like your question to be answered, drop it down in the Q&A section of Spotify and you may see it in a future episode. This episode's vital question comes from Symphony Sepp, who asks, what is the biggest health issue right now? Interesting question, Symphony Sepp. When I think of problems that affect the population at large, I'd say about 4 things come to mind: antibiotic resistance, mental health issues, obesity, and climate change. Firstly, there's antibiotic resistance. We touched on this topic briefly in this episode, and this is the problem that I feel most passionate about. Antibiotics hinder or kill bacteria by targeting their vital processes: the synthesis or creation of the cell wall, the hard skin, the cell membrane, their soft skin, proteins, their building material, and nucleic acids, their DNA. And plenty of bacteria share these processes. Since Dr. Fleming discovered penicillin by accident in 1928, antibiotics were praised as miracle drugs to humanity. But that reputation has become a double-edged sword. On one hand, antibiotics saved millions of lives, but on the other hand, antibiotics became misused. The populace began overdosing on antibiotics or not finishing their antibiotic dosages. People took expired antibiotics for other illnesses. Animals were fed antibiotics for their meat, and humans took antibiotics for viral infections. Antibiotics do nothing against viruses. This heavy misuse of antibiotics constantly applied selective pressure on virulent bacteria and presented a perfect opportunity for new bacteria to evolve. Now, take this concept, multiply it over dozens of patients who may or may not wash their hands thoroughly, by the way, in a high-traffic area, say a city hospital, and throw in the ability of bacteria to share these drug-resistant genes amongst themselves. It's all but guaranteed that bacteria strains like MRSA will eventually arise. Humans have proposed a few solutions to this crisis, however. The most obvious solution, and the one discussed earlier this episode, is to discover new drugs quicker than bacteria can adapt to them. Another potential solution is called phage therapy, and it's my personal favorite. There are tiny viruses called bacteriophages that target specifically and exclusively closely related strains of bacteria. They're largely harmless to human cells, but the best part is that as bacteria adapt to gain immunity against the bacteriophages, they lose resistance against our antibiotics. Phage therapy involves administering a cocktail of both bacteriophages and antibiotics to put a bacterial infection in a catch-22. Scientists are at work studying the ups and downs of phage therapy and many other different proposed solutions, and we hope to get a definitive solution soon. The second problem is mental health, and while problems with mental health are present among all age groups, I'm most concerned with teenagers and young adults. Young adults ages 18 to 25 in the US experience the highest rates of mental illness. That's 36.2%. Globally, one in every person aged 10 to 19 experience a mental disorder, accounting for 13% of the global burden of disease in this age group. Half of all mental health disorders in adulthood start by age 14, but most cases are undetected and untreated. Suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. Just like many problems on this list, it's complicated and doesn't have an easy fix. There are plenty of categories that disorders can fit into: anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders or OCDs, sleep wake disorders, bipolar disorders, trauma or stress related disorders, addictive disorders, personality disorders, dissociative disorders, and more. With that being said, anxiety disorders are the most common mental health concern in the United States, affecting 19.1% of the population. People with this disorder may experience excessive fear or anxiety over plenty of things, and it may get so bad that living daily life becomes difficult. There's three big ones that fit into this category: generalized anxiety disorder, which is sustained or persistent anxiety; panic disorder, which is regular panic attacks; and social anxiety disorder, which is fear of social judgment that can impede daily life. Researchers have proposed solutions to try to address the problem early, as in 2 to 7 years old early. Exposing kids to others in a social setting chemically alters the brain to be more adjusted to new social experiences, like meeting new people. For teens and young adults that may have an anxiety disorder already, therapy is the best tool. There's never shame in helping yourself. And if you're experiencing any type of mental health crisis, you can text HOME to 741-741 to talk over text with someone who can help. Thirdly, a problem that the world and especially Americans are dealing with is proving to be a stubborn one: the rise in obesity and physical inactivity. In 2022, 1 in 8 people in the world were living with obesity. This branches out into many other long-term complications like high cholesterol, heartburn, sleep apnea, hypertension, gallbladder disease, diabetes, certain cancers, stroke, joint problems, liver conditions like fatty liver disease, and the number one killer in the United States and the world: heart disease. Obesity is both complex and multifaceted, caused by the interaction between biological, genetic, social, psychological, and environmental factors. For example, genetics, sleep deprivation, excessive amounts of stress, access to good childcare or schooling, high quality healthcare and safe housing, and economic stability are also risk factors of obesity, just as diet and activity are. When it comes to diet, the CDC says that highly processed foods, or foods with added sugars, especially sugar-sweetened drinks, or foods lacking in vitamins, make up a bad diet that could lead to obesity. Now, if you stroll through the supermarket and see how many ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, there are compared to how much produce or natural food there is, you can see why there's a growing obesity epidemic. When addressing activity, the CDC advises that regular physical activity is one of the most important things that people can do to improve their health, and that some activity is always better than none. They recommend adolescents from 6 to 17 get at least an hour or more of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity daily. For adults aged 18 and up, they recommend 150 minutes of moderately intense activity weekly. Bonus points to ages 65 and up for doing activities that improve balance, like standing on one foot. Lastly, but certainly not least, there's the issue of pollution and climate change. It may not sound like a health problem, but it certainly does become one when it causes asthma, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, reproductive disorders, neurological disorders, immunological disorders, and the deadliest form of cancer, lung cancer. And this is only the direct relationships, like when humans have to, for example, breathe in pollutants and fumes. Climate change increases the chances of natural disasters like hurricanes, flooding, and earthquakes. Needless to say, human death and injury stems from these events directly, but humans can be affected indirectly from the risk of harmful chemicals or pathogens entering the water supply following these natural disasters. For example, in 2005, Texas had a norovirus outbreak following Hurricane Katrina, and in 2010, Haiti had a severe cholera epidemic following a 7.0 magnitude earthquake earlier that year. What's more, when water recedes from flooding, there's an increased risk of mold growth. The spores can irritate one's eyes, nose, or throat and can worsen pre-existing lung diseases. Extreme temperatures also increase the likelihood of temperature-related illnesses like heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Differing seasons means changes in growing seasons, which affects the release of common allergens like pollen. Chemicals we use also deplete the ozone layer, which in turn makes UV light from the sun harsher, leading to sunburn, quicker aging, skin cancer, and cataracts. To put it briefly, climate change and pollution are both not good for human health. To sum it all up, the biggest health issue that we face today cannot be narrowed down to one thing because of the scope and impact of these four issues: antibiotic resistance, mental health, obesity, and climate change. Scientists around the world, however, are working hard to mitigate these problems for a brighter future, so there's always hope. Thanks for the question, Symphony 7. That's all for this week's episode, so thank you for tuning in. Follow the podcast and share the episode with your friends. If you'd like your questions answered, remember to drop a response in the Q&A section of this video. Again, remember to join the Discord. The invite link is in the description. Until next time, keep your vitals strong and your spirits high. This is your host, Chauncey, signing off. Take care and stay healthy. I'll see you next week.